After this meeting, Fraser changed his public stance towards Kerr. He became deferential.
Of course we'd accept the Governor-General's decision. It'd be utterly wrong to do anything else.
But Whitlam remained convinced that Kerr was with him. He refused to consider dismissal as a serious option throughout the crisis. What consideration was given to the possibility that Kerr might dismiss Whitlam?
Almost none. In fact, I would say it was never a factor in our assessment of either the strategy or the likely outcome of the situation.
In the hundreds of divisions which have taken place in the House of Representatives last year and this year, the Labor government has never been defeated.
Whitlam's confidence was driven by the tide of public opinion, which was hostile to Fraser's blocking of the budget. Whitlam gambled everything on the opposition losing its nerve. As the crisis entered its third week, the focus shifted to Melbourne and the festivities surrounding the Melbourne Cup. Federal and state Liberal and Country Party leaders held a summit meeting at Treasury Place. They took two decisions: to stand firm and to offer a tactical concession. The next day, Fraser saw the Governor-General and offered to pass the budget immediately if Whitlam agreed to a general election before the middle of 1976.
We put it forward in good faith, and if he'd accepted it, there would have been no dismissal.
I think it's an indication of how obsessed, I think it's probably the word, Whitlam had become, because the proposition was a very reasonable one.
30 minutes after Fraser left, Kerr saw Whitlam at Government House, Melbourne. The Prime Minister rejected the Fraser compromise out of hand. Whitlam was chasing a total victory upon him, but neither Whitlam nor Fraser would back off. On the 6th of November, Kerr conducted his last consultations with the leaders. Fraser now turned up the pressure to get an election.
I made it quite clear that in those circumstances I would have to say that the Governor-General had let down not only the office of Governor-General, but the people of Australia, because in many ways he holds that office and is custodian of the reserve powers.
He was under pressure from Fraser, who was threatening virtually, this is what John said, virtually to denounce him as a Labor Party stooge.
But at this meeting, in effect, you were really advising him that he should dismiss Mr. Whitlam.
Well, I wouldn't have put it in those terms. I would have said if there is not an election, we'll, have to say something about it.
Fraser, can you tell us anything about your meeting with the Governor-General?
No, I couldn't on other occasions, and I can't on this occasion.
Is your stand still firm about blocking supply?
Of course it is.
Did he give you any advice?
Malcolm Fraser returned from Yarralumla, convinced he would prevail. I saw both leaders later that day. Fraser told me that the crisis would be resolved by Kerr's dismissal of the Prime Minister. But Whitlam assured me that Kerr was rock solid. The Governor-General now began serious preparations for the dismissal, and he was intent on keeping his plan a secret from Whitlam.
I can remember several little incidents that in which he deliberately, I believe, set out to convince me that that was not even on his mind. And I think that was dishonourable. He used me, an old friend, in order to lull Whitlam into a false sense of security. That's why I've been critic, why I never forgave him.
The whole essence of the enterprise was surprise. It was ambush. And it was ambush, weird notion, it was ambush in the centres of power.
Why didn't Kerr properly consult and warn you?
I don't know. I mean, let's face it, he was a weak man and a deceptive man and a dishonourable man.
It's quite true, John did not tell him what he was going to do. The reason for that we've already touched on, because John was convinced, I think rightly, that as soon as Gough was sure that the reserve powers were going to be exercised to dismiss him as Prime Minister, then he would have gone straight to the Queen. John's view, as I've said, was that that would have been a disaster, but moreover, he felt no obligation to tell Gough, one of the two contending parties, what his stream of thought was. And indeed, there was no obligation. So he didn't mislead him at all. Gough misled himself.
But some people predicted the dismissal, including the newspaper proprietor Rupert Murdoch.
I had lunch with him and with Ken Cowley, and told me, Rupert Murdoch did, that in effect there'd be, the government would be dismissed, there would be an election for the House of Representatives, and in a friendly sort of way said, well, John, don't worry, you'll be appointed as ambassador to Tokyo, which turned out to be, he was right on both counts.
It is a conversation which Murdoch denies. Sir John Kerr was so worried during the crisis that his office contacted Buckingham Palace to find out the exact procedures for a Governor-General's removal by the Prime Minister. Whether Whitlam would have been prepared to have sacked Kerr is the conundrum of the crisis.
Do you think that Mr Whitlam would have been prepared to move against Sir John Kerr?
Yes, I have no doubt whatsoever.
You wouldn't have moved against the Governor-General?
No, I think I would have had enough sense to realise that if I had removed the Governor-General surreptitiously, I'd be as popular and respected as Kerr became for removing me surreptitiously.
Having decided to sack Whitlam, Kerr wanted the support of the Chief Justice of the High Court, Sir Garfield Barwick. Barwick was expecting to be asked. As early as the 20th of September, Kerr had told Barwick that he might need his opinion.
I heard no more of him until the 9th of November, on a Sunday evening, when he rang and asked me would I see him the next morning on my way to court. I did, and then he asked me the question, in substance, not in terms, was he bound to keep a Prime Minister who couldn't obtain supply? And that's a question that's not difficult really to answer. And that's the only question, in one sense, which I answered. That question, I thought, no court could decide.
Barwick was an icon to him. He still is to any of the survivors of that generation. And it could have got back to Kerr, it probably did, that Barwick, who despised everybody, had said of him, oh, Jack Kerr, his generation referred to him as Jack before he became John, Jack Kerr ought to sack Whitlam, but he'll never have the guts. Now, Kerr was a bit short of guts too. He would have consulted Barwick for reinforcement, for approval.
He was greatly strengthened by knowing that this eminent constitutional authority, Sir Garfield Barwick, said, yes, you have not merely the power, but you have the duty to exercise the reserve powers.
Very good morning to you. Bill Dowsett with AM for Tuesday, the 11th of November, and what a day of anniversaries today is. It's Remembrance Day. It's also the 10th anniversary of UDI. It's the day a new African nation comes into being, and the day on which there could be some end to our own constitutional deadlock.
November the 11th would be a busy day for Sir John Kerr. He had to remember the fallen and conduct an execution. Whitlam now proceeded with his plan to call a Senate election. He rang the Governor-General at mid-morning to make a lunchtime appointment to tender this advice. Unbeknown to Whitlam, Kerr had the dismissal documents ready.
Do you seriously
The Governor-General now rang Fraser. The contents of this discussion have been disputed between Fraser and Kerr. According to Fraser's version, it is clear he was alerted to Whitlam's dismissal as a possibility.
The Governor-General rang and asked 4 questions, which he emphasised were hypothetical questions, but it had got to the stage where he felt that he needed to know what my response would be. And the questions were, if I did become Prime Minister, if I was commissioned to form a government, would I recommend an election? Would I get supply through? Would I refrain from any witch hunts against the previous government? And would I regard the government as a caretaker government, making no important decisions until after an election had been, a full election had been held? And I had no problem in saying yes to those 4 questions.